Tansik Group B. This is week 8 and it's Sandy. I am attempting again to cover the PowerPoint presentation, the podcast area, and so this is going to be uploaded through YouTube. I'm hoping you're able to view this. There was 2 parts to our presentation this week, and one was the act of moral courage covered under part 1 through Angela's request for an activity for the group members to report back about an act of moral courage that they engaged in. Part 2 is covering the articles or research, by Carrier, as well as the article by Okada, The Plight of Ainu, Indigenous People of Japan. So in the first slide, I have shown a traditional wraparound moccasin, the focus around that was about maintaining connection to community and identity, as well as social justice. I then moved into slide 2 and quoted Janine Carrier. She stated, "Without connection to birth family and community, First Nation adoptees experience loss, which is manifested through impaired physical, mental, and emotional and spiritual health." Certainly true when we have a disconnect. We certainly are impacted as individuals in all of those areas. I was very interested in reading Carrier's article this week, as well as additionally I went in and did a research or a read of one of her other articles, and it is entitled Promising Practice for Maintaining Identities in First Nation Adoption. And in that particular reading, she has made some recommendations based on the reports or the recommendations of the 18 adoptees that she interviewed during her research. So slide 3 is actually showing 2 young Métis sisters in front of Métis wagon cart, as well as the Métis flag and the teepee behind them. And I thought that was a very powerful picture in terms of connecting with families and communities and heritage. Certainly this is what Carrier is expressing in her research, in that there are many areas that we can look at in terms of the policy and legislation within child welfare adoptions. The recommendations from the 18 adoptees are as follows. There's 4 areas actually that they pinpoint, and those are information, adoption practices, legislation, and support. And so I'm going to go into each one of those. Under information, the adoptees have recommended information on birth families should be made available to adoptees as soon as they desire it. Number 2, health information from birth families is preserved for adoptees. Number 3, post-adoption registries need to be revised to A, allow access to other birth family members, such as extended family, and provide information to adoptees when they want it. And number 4, pictures should be made available to birth families and adoptees. And the 5th area under information, First Nation adoptees need to know which tribe and First Nation they come from, which community do they originate from. Adoption practices, under that area, the 18 adoptees firstly identify adoption of First Nation children should be in First Nation or Aboriginal homes if at all possible. Number 2, connection to extended family and community should not be severed through adoption. Thirdly, if First Nation children are not placed in a First Nation home, cultural training needs to be provided to adoptive parents. 4th, cultural mentors should be provided to First Nation adoptees to assist in reconnecting to their cultural heritage. And 5th item under adoption practices, adoptive homes need to continue to be monitored by Child and Family Services agencies in some way or somehow. So you can see that under those two areas, information and adoption practices, the adoptees are certainly identifying that in order to be connected and to help maintain their identity, that if these types of changes to legislation were implemented and put in place, they would have an easier time in maintaining their identity. They also moved on to the legislation area, and there's 3 recommendations that they made under legislation. Legislation on adoption of First Nation children needs to be explored further, and at minimum, it needs to be open. Secondly, they would like to see further support for customary adoption. And thirdly, the rights of adoptees to receive all information about their identity, extended family, and community of origin need to be defined further in adoption legislation, policy, and standards. Under the area of support, the 4th area, the adoptees identified recommendations. Number 1, adoptees involved in search and reunion require support services to assist them in these processes. Number 2, peer support groups for First Nation adoptees need to be established. And third, counseling services should be made available to First Nations adoptees. Now, Carrier's research speaks strongly about the need for changes within child welfare adoption legislation. And, sorry, my throat is very, very sore. And I wanted to just communicate that I have some experience in terms of aspects of adoption. I am an adoptive mother of a First Nations child, and he is an extended family, so it is a kinship adoption, which has been very successful. He's 27 years old and he is doing well. He has never been disconnected with his birth parents. He's been connected to all extended family on both sides, the father and mother's side. He has been encouraged and included in ceremonial practices and ways of knowing and culture. And I'm happy to report he's using those tools today in his life, living in the big city of Calgary. So I just wanted to highlight that when we look at adoption, there are ways of ensuring that there is success and kids are not disconnected from their families. I only speak of my experience, but certainly with the research that Carrier has done, there's a lot of recommendations there that I strongly agree with. And I think that Sheila, actually, you shared in some of the prior posts your experiences as well, and you could probably speak to some of these recommendations by the adoptees. Moving on to Okada's article, Okada describes the plight of the Innu indigenous people of Japan, and what was glaring for me in his article was the similarities in policies and the experiences of the indigenous people of Japan as well as those in Canada. There's glaring similarities. The policies around assimilation and discriminatory policies are mirrored. They just mirror each other very strongly, and that really stood out for me in his readings. What I wanted to point out with regards to just even one of those policies in terms of mirroring, when I think about the placement of Indigenous people onto plots of land, and they were encouraged to farm, and they were encouraged not to be living off the land in terms of hunting and fishing, etc. And they were discouraged to through not only the farming policies, but the policies around the laws against practicing cultural ceremonies. So all of that removes you from your ways of knowing and your culture, and certainly this is what Okada is speaking about in his article as well. So I thought there was some really interesting pieces there. With regards to the farming, I just wanted to get back to that. The Innu people were also placed on lands and asked to farm these lands, and certainly that pulled away from their identity. A great read. I encourage you, if you haven't picked up the article, to go to pick it up and read it. It's yeah, I was just I don't know why I was surprised, but I was very surprised at the similarities in policies. They're different names, of course, but certainly mirrored the assimilation tactics as well as the discriminatory policies that we've experienced as First Nations individuals. So the United Nations, together with the International Indigenous Peoples Rights and Advocacy Organizations, has drawn attention to the education, cultural, and tradition protection, as well as self-determination and land rights of Indigenous people. And Okada speaks about that in his article in terms of highlighting this. Japan is now attempting to move towards including the Innu people, but certainly there has been a disconnection of culture and ways of knowing for the Innu people, and I think those areas are certainly highlighted within Okada's article. The sixth slide, I've got a picture of two young boys, one holding another one up in the air, and they're they look like two brothers, but they're actually cousins, and they are my nephew John and my son Kyron. Kyron's the young man with the hat, and what I'm showing there is that my way of preserving identity, I guess, was through the adoption of Kyron and raising him in my home as my son, but not disconnecting him with his biological family as well as his extended family. In this slide, the young boy he's holding up is actually his first cousin. So his bio mother and his uncle are brother and sister, and the uncle is the father of the little boy he's holding up in the air. The fingers with the heart around it and the statement Kasagitin means I love you in Cree, and this is something I thought was really powerful in terms of showing how love within a family can continue even when there is a kinship adoption, not even when, but the fact that love is shown in that way, and we don't discontinue our connect with kids when we bring them into our lives, and we encourage them to engage within the family. That was something that was taught to me by my parents and my grandparents, and that was through customary adoption. But certainly with my case, we did go through the courts and we adopted him through the legal courts. But again, it was, in my opinion, a customary adoption because we were approached and we had lots of dialogue within the family about the adoption. So the question on slide 6 asks, what are the kinds of things you can do in your practice to help towards preserving identity and decolonization? Just some thoughts in terms of what you can do as social workers out there to preserve identity and work towards decolonization. We certainly got a really good discussion going already. Today is Thursday. I've seen a couple of posts, one by Emily and Sheila, and certainly there's some really good dialogue around preserving identity and decolonization. So some really good discussion. I encourage you to engage in some of the feedback and posts that we've started in this week's forum. And the slide 7, the question in that particular slide speaks about during this week's readings, what did you find informative that may have moved you to further your work in social justice, whether that's in your field of practice or in your personal life? What's your thoughts around your themes or your education endeavors in terms of the field of social work? So just wanted to really provoke some thoughts around those areas as they do connect with our last assignment number 4, the critical ethnography of practice for life, in terms of getting you to think about some of these policies maybe that Carrier has talked about, or possibly Okada has identified in the plight of the Innu, and how those are mirrored within the Canadian government, the settlers' government, and how the Indigenous people of Canada have been really oppressed with all of the policies that have come forward during colonization. So again, really just getting you to think about assignment 4. If you pick up assignment 4 and you read through the assignment and you go to the slides, certainly you probably can connect some of the thoughts around those questions, and when you read the articles, it may help you in identifying a policy that you might want to pick up and explore for assignment 4. I hope this has been helpful in terms of the slide presentation. Again, Carrier's article, very powerful research that she has put forward. She certainly is speaking to the changes that need to be made in terms of child welfare adoptions. She's pushing for and advocating for children to be placed in, Indigenous children to be placed in Indigenous or Aboriginal homes, if at all possible. And she's certainly communicating that they need to be connected to their communities, their extended family, and to their culture, to their ways of knowing. And this will facilitate the continued identity that little babies and little children carry even from a young age. There's sorry, I think one of the adoptees identified that it's just part of you. You just know within you that you belong somewhere. So when you facilitate that connection, that need to belong suddenly goes away because you are connected. So I think that was a very powerful read. Again, thank you, and I hope you enjoy this week's presentation. All the best. Hi, Naskumtin.